Hello and welcome, I'm Oles Gerjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Venezuela is engulfed in a political crisis with two rival politicians claiming to be the country's legitimate president. In January this year, Juan Guaido, the opposition leader, declared himself Venezuela's interim president, and he has been recognized by more than 50 countries. But dictator Nicolas Maduro, who is backed by Russia and the leaders of Venezuela's military, has refused to cede power. The two sides have been locked in a standoff for 5 months already. To discuss the ongoing crisis in Venezuela, we're joined in the studio today by Sergiy Korsunsky, director of the Hennadii Udovenko Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine. Hello and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, pleasure.
Pleasure to have you here. So we have seen that the recognized leader Juan Guaido has been trying to organize a coup recently and make Maduro flee the country, but this didn't happen. Why do you think?
If we judge from the statements of United States government, particularly from Bolton and Pompeo, it looks like that Russian government persuaded Maduro to stay in the country, and that happened 1st of May. And then, since then, there is a kind of standoff which probably will not be resolved in a peaceful manner. As far as I understand, there are already demonstrations and fight with police forces with some casualties.
Yes, clashes turned out to be extremely violent, and there are casualties, and there was a horrific accident when Venezuelan National Guard vehicles were seen slamming into protesters.
Exactly.
In Caracas, no official number of people injured or killed has been revealed, but so far we know about 4 deaths. And it looks like Maduro is ready to do anything just in order not to step down even the most horrific acts. Can this possibly scare Guaido away?
I don't think so, actually, because he is supported by the National Assembly, by the Parliament of Venezuela, and that gives him legitimacy. The point is that Maduro government continues the policy of Hugo Chavez, the previous president, and that's turned a potentially extremely rich country. Venezuela is a beautiful piece of land and very rich in oil, into a kind of North Korea situation when the people starving from
devastated, hopeless land.
Exactly. So the very poor, the population is very poor. Lack of normal food and medicine. Millions of Venezuelans try to leave the country, to flee to surroundings, to Colombia, for example, first of all. Border was closed, you know, the humanitarian aid was proposed by the international community and brought to the country, but it was not allowed to enter.
Because of the regime of Maduro.
That's exactly the point. I mean, this is dictatorship. This is purely dictatorship. That's exactly, you know, if you kindly remember what Russian government is doing to the food brought from Western Europe, to Russia, they destroy the food. That's exactly how Maduro behaved towards the humanitarian aid. So that is why it is quite obvious that it cannot continue this way.
But what does he have in mind? What is his aim when he is refusing from this humanitarian aid, blocking the borders and making people feeling even more desperate? Is this the politics of a constant fear?
I think it is easier to manage the poor country. If they feel they have support from outside, people may feel emboldened, and that would give them hope, probably, because there is no reason, if you love your country and if you serve your people, there is no reason to block this humanitarian aid. And as far as I understand, the situation is very similar right now to the Syrian crisis. When it was at the beginning, it was a chance to remove Bashar al-Assad from the power in Syria and to keep situation at least under control. That exactly almost resembles the situation in Venezuela, that right now it is still possible to quiet the situation, to keep it under control. But if proper measures will not be taken from outside, from inside, probably it is not possible.
What are the proper measures?
Proper measures, let's try to negotiate a solution, but a solution from United States point of view, this is the only one. Maduro has no legitimacy. That is why his counterpart, Guaido, was recognized by European Union, by United States, by 50 countries. So, you know, this recognition, it's not just a political decision, it's legal decision. So, it was carefully considered in all the major capitals around the globe. Even in South America, that's for me, by the way, more the most important proof of his legitimacy, the position of 14 countries of South America, which all support, they all supported Guaido. So that means probably we don't know all the legal details behind this crisis, but probably Guaido has a ground to claim legitimate power. Other thing, that army protects Maduro, and Guaido failed to ignite the army, to take army, to bring army on his side.
That's only probably some militants, some troops stepped on his side.
Very few of them. Probably that is because it's normal again. If we would follow the history of dictatorship around the globe, security apparatus and army and security services, they always serve dictators. So they are well paid, they're well kept. And by the way, the regime in Venezuela is very well known with huge corruption in military and security apparatus. They participated in drug trafficking, in trade of drugs from all around the globe. So,
and they don't want to lose these schemes,
of course,
probably.
For them, life is good.
Yeah, this is their zone of comfort.
Exactly.
But in your opinion, how to overthrow Maduro if not with the coup? If Juan Guaido cannot manage right now to organize a proper coup?
There were examples in the past when a leader of the country in a situation similar to Maduro was persuaded just peacefully leave the country in exchange of a kind of immunity. So he was actually proposed a place, Cuba. So he had to leave for Cuba and stay there. And in Cuba, he would be well protected. And actually, as State Secretary Pompeo claimed, there were 25,000 Cuban troops in Venezuela protecting him personally. So, and they're very well trained special operation forces. Cuban government denied that.
Of course.
Very fiercely. They said not a single Cuban military officer is in Venezuela, rather than some of medical staff.
Assistants, and doctors.
So probably, we don't know the truth, of course. It is very difficult to judge because Caracas now is very tough place to stay, even for journalists. So I think that could be a solution if Maduro would be advised and his closed circle to leave for another country and live peacefully without intervening in the internal affairs of Venezuela.
But the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also says that there are Russians in Venezuela. He told this to the U.S. broadcaster ABC. I have a quote. "It's very clear. We want the Russians out. We want the Iranians out. We want the Cubans out." End of quote. And the U.S. Secretary of State emphasized that the United States may take military action to resolve the crisis. You mentioned that the United States is probably the biggest player who could resolve the situation in Venezuela. But on the other hand, Mr. Trump has a bit softer rhetoric. He says that he doesn't want American troops to invade and interfere in all of this situation. So the position of the United States, to me, is pretty unclear. Could you please provide us with some details in your comments on this?
Unclear, this is the slightest we can say about the situation. It looks like there is already a kind of conflict in between White House and Pompeo and Bolton on the other side. They said many times that the United States can intervene with the force. Definitely this is not politics of Trump. For him, much more important that the United States is entering now with full speed into new presidential campaign. And he already knows that he has very tough candidate from Democratic side, Joe Biden, former vice president. So he understands this will be very tough fight. He doesn't want United States again to enter into a war. You remember that he withdrew troops from Syria, very controversial decision, but he was very persistent on that United States must leave territories far away from United States, which are not the highest priority interest of the United States. I don't think in his plans to intervene military in Venezuela. On the other hand, we cannot exclude some special operations. It happened many times in the past. Probably that was the call from Trump to Putin, was to kind of find a solution to explain to President of Russia that supporting Maduro, he intervenes in the close neighborhood of the United States, and probably this is not a good way to behave. We will see. Trump is very well known with very, I would say, untraditional type of negotiations, and what he does normally, he tries to widen his sphere of freedom. He wants to have many solutions rather than one choice. So probably there will be no immediate military action in Venezuela, but we will see how the situation will develop. What I think that United States cannot afford to allow full-blown civil war in Venezuela. So they will probably intervene but we should remember as well that we have like $20 billion oil deals of Rosneft, the beloved friend of Putin, Mr. Sechin, interest in Venezuela. And on the other hand, China has $23 billion investment in a similar way. So China is not happy too. And this is kind of another story, and it makes picture more complicated because on one hand, United States may look for support from China to resolve the crisis and leave business as it is. So let them have their billions invested and working. At the same time, you know, United States and China is a trade war, and probably if tomorrow it may come that Trump will impose new tariffs. So it's so complicated in between those three major players that it is absolutely impossible right now to predict even developments for 2 days. I do think that military action right now from United States, it's a little bit I don't think it's possible very soon. I mean, probably it will, if it happened, maybe a little bit later.
So the interest of Russia and China is business and oil, basically. But also in the American media, we've seen the information that Trump is ready for serious compromises with China, and this even puts this dialogue in a deadlock, because on one hand, the U.S. is ready for the compromise, on the other hand, it needs China's help in this Venezuelan crisis. Then Russia have its interest and a pure influence in Venezuela. You
know, in contemporary geopolitics, business and politics, they come hand to hand. They always intertwined in different on different levels. When we talk about China, the negotiations between United States and China, they are underway. But Chinese, they are very difficult negotiators.
Yes, but why do these Chinese or Russian oil businessmen, and authorities, why do they prefer Maduro instead of Guaido?
Because Guaido already made a statement that all the agreements signed between Maduro government and those major investors, they are not legal. He said those agreements must be approved by the National Assembly, and they did not. So the point is that both Russian government and Chinese government, they are not sure that if regime would change and Guaido will be in power, their investment are protected and the contracts will continue. And definitely, I would strongly suggest that behind the scene, behind the point of the visible part of negotiations, probably they try to guarantee, to persuade Guaido to make guarantees to Russians and to Chinese that those investments will continue as it is. So he will cherish and he will maintain the contracts done by Maduro. So whether they will be successful, this is a question. It's a big question. But if for China, it is still a point of business. This is number one. I don't think they look for political gains. For Russian Federation, it's a completely different story. They can easily, as many other projects around the globe suggests to us, shows us that for Russia, it is not just a question of money. It's a question of politics. So whenever United States express their strong political interest, you see Russia intervening right away. So they probably will bargain for some political concession from Washington in exchange of leaving Maduro in the hands of Venezuelan people.
You mean that they want to divide powers, and this can
They want to divide spheres of influence, first of all. They want a kind of Yalta II mechanism which would say, look, this is my neighborhood. You should not intervene in this neighborhood. And definitely, as you may guess, Ukraine, Belarus, and Caucasus, etc., this is the sphere of influence of Russian Empire. So, and in exchange for that, I promise you not to intervene in North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Syria, and other hot points around the globe.
And then, unfortunately, it means that this all Venezuelan situation can hit Ukraine as well, as the sphere of interest.
Partially, yes, unfortunately, because we are. This is now a neighbor, unfortunately.
Yes,
and we have to live with him.
Well, thank you so much for this clear comments, for this interesting and meaningful conversation. Thank you. That was Sergiy Korsunsky, director of the Hennadii Udovenko Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Nicolas Maduro. Goodbye.